Yeah, you just sound more authoritative. Thank you. Good afternoon. This is the October 4th, 2022 regular meeting of the City Council. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Here.
Councilmember Friedman.
Here.
Councilmember Snedden.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
And Mayor Russ.
Here. And we are going to start out with some ceremonial items. You have something to read?
Yes. Item 1, Stearns Wharf 150th anniversary.
Stearns Wharf 150th anniversary, and I was practicing sesquicentennial, but that's, got that one right that time. Whereas October 8th, 2022 marks the 150th anniversary of the opening of Santa Barbara Stearns Wharf, and whereas the creation of Stearns Wharf in 1872 by John Peck Stearns with the financial backing of Colonel William Wells Hollister provided a vital link for the previously isolated coastal hamlet of Santa Barbara to the outside world. And whereas Stearns Wharf served during Santa Barbara's early years as the only link for the movement of people, goods, and services to and from Santa Barbara. And whereas Stearns Wharf afforded Santa Barbara the essential means to grow into the nationally and internationally renowned community we all know and love. And whereas over the decades, Stearns Wharf served and supported many important functions, including lumber, commercial fishing, and exploration of oil resources in the Santa Barbara Channel, retail, education, tourism, and community enjoyment. And whereas Stearns Wharf today is Santa Barbara's #1 tourist attraction, as well as a popular place for leisure activities of local citizens. And whereas Stearns Wharf, the oldest working wooden pier on the coastline of the state of California, has survived many challenges, including the 1925 earthquake, World War II, several fires, and occasional ferocious winter storms. And whereas Stearns Wharf is an icon that is part of our city's identity and unique character, a tangible reminder of our history and emblematic of our link with the ocean, now therefore I, Randy Rouse, by the virtue of authority vested in me as the mayor of the city of Santa Barbara, California, do hereby commemorate and celebrate Stearns Wharf as a treasure of our city and extend my appreciation to the many individuals, businesses, organizations, and city staff who work daily to ensure that Stearns Wharf may continue to be an amazing resource for our city, our residents, and our visitors. Director Wiltshire.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I'll be very, very brief, and thank you, council members. I'm Mike Wiltshire, Waterfront Director. I'm really honored to accept this on behalf of the Waterfront Department and the city and everyone who does business down at the wharf and works there every day. It really is such an interesting and iconic piece of infrastructure. I could dive into the history, but I really want to just spend a little bit of time recognizing the staff and the people who work down there every day. So maintaining it, cleaning it, repairing it, and really just truly keeping it afloat. So Stearns Wharf is held up by over 2,000 wooden piles and thousands of wooden deck boards, water lines, sewer lines, electrical lines, gas lines all run out and feed the businesses. All of this is being constantly maintained by a very, very small but very, very dedicated and capable group of people. So a huge thank you to those who work day in and day out at Stearns Wharf, both above the deck and down below the deck. A very specific thanks to the waterfront maintenance staff who's down there every day. I invited them up here today. They're busy getting ready for this weekend's events. So just a huge thank you to them. Without them, the Stearns Wharf wouldn't be where it is today. One more plug, so come down to Stearns Wharf this Saturday. There'll be celebration going on all day. There'll be performance by the Santa Barbara Opera, a tall ship, firing of the historic cannon, hoping for some back and forth between the tall ship and the Stearns Wharf cannon, and live music, and we're culminating with a 7 p.m. fireworks show. So come on down October 8th. And again, thank you, Mayor Rouse. Thank you, council members, for taking the time to honor this special piece of infrastructure. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Director Wiltshire. And Madam Administrator, you have an employee recognition.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. As we do each month, this is my chance to recognize the anniversaries of a number of your employees. I would like to start with those employees celebrating their 5-year work anniversary. Matthew Carlisle, police officer in our police department. Raymond Fatherware, police officer, police department. Adam Shull, police officer, police department. Kelsey King, police officer, police department. Edward Casper, police officer, police department. John Duffy, police officer, police department. Joanne Martinez, parking enforcement officer in the police department. Scott Souza, senior public works inspector in the public works department. John St. Clair, painter in the public works department. Ariana Billick, library circulation supervisor in the library. Theo Sullivan, airport patrol officer at the airport department. With 10 years of experience, of service. John Barriga, police officer, police department. Michael Chung, police officer, police department. Caitlin Sipes, police officer in the police department. And Laura Yanez, principal engineer in the public works department. With 15 years of service, Thomas Alvarez, maintenance worker 2 in the public works department. With 25 years of service, Winther Martinez, water treatment plant operator 3 in the public works department, and Ricardo Venegas, neighborhood outreach services coordinator 2 in the parks and recreation department. And finally, with 35 years of experience, Gregory Lowe, heavy equipment technician at the waterfront. Thank you.
Very good. And with that, Madam Administrator, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes, Mayor Rouse.
Okay, with that, we'll go to general public comment, 3 minutes on the dais for anything that is not on our agenda and is within the purview of this body. And I have Michael Baker, somebody we're rather familiar with.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Michael Baker, CEO, United Boys and Girls Clubs. I just wanted to give you a quick update that things are still going very well with the clubs. We're getting busier and busier as restrictions are being lifted more and more. Seeing kids coming more often. Looking forward to our gold card ceremony happening in November. Thank you for setting that up. Kids are very much looking forward to that. And I'm happy to report to you that the highest number that we ever have, and the card that we give at our annual meetings, and Mayor Rouse has been there before to present those, is our blue card, which is to children that have attended 200 days or more in the same calendar year. And we have our very first member that's already achieved that status this year, and it's a downtown club member. So he's attended already 202 days this year, which is remarkable. So he may set the new record for us in our organization. I did want to take the time to pass, I don't know who I hand these to, but we have one of these here for everybody on the council. It's our upcoming event on October 15th. Bali High to celebrate our fall gala in support of the United Boys and Girls Clubs. And if you want proof that the Boys and Girls Clubs work, Mayor Rouse, all you need to do is look to 3 seats to your right or 2 seats to your left. There's 2 members there that went to Boys and Girls Clubs and are products of what we do, and we're very proud of both of you for the work that you're doing to support your community. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Are there any speakers online?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, very good. Then we will go to the consent calendar. Do we have any items to read?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Item 4, 2022 through 2025, Firefighters Association Bargaining Unit Memorandum of Understanding, Ordinance Introduction. Recommendation the council ratify the Memorandum of Understanding between the city and the Santa Barbara Firefighters Association by introduction and subsequent adoption of, by reading of title only, an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara adopting a Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Santa Barbara and the Santa Barbara Firefighters Association for the period of July 1, 2022 through July 30th, 2025. Item 5, 2022 through 2025, Police Officers Association Bargaining Unit Memorandum of Understanding, an amendment of Resolution Number 22-064, the Position and Salary Control Resolution for fiscal year 2023, Ordinance Introduction Resolution. Recommendation that Council A, ratify the Memorandum of Understanding between the city and the Santa Barbara Police Officers Association by introduction and subsequent adoption of, by reading of title only, an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara adopting a Memorandum of Understanding between the City of Santa Barbara and the Santa Barbara Police Officers Association for the period of July 1, 2023 through June 30th, 2025, and B, adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Resolution Number 22-064, the Position and Salary Control Resolution for fiscal year 2023, affecting certain classifications of the Police Officers Association, effective October 8th, 2022. Number 6, acceptance of Homeland Security Grant Resolution Agreement. Recommendation that Council A accept a grant for $51,081 from the Homeland Security Grant Program for the procurement of firefighting equipment, and B, adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara amending Resolution Number 22059, adopting the budget for fiscal year 2023 to approve an increase of revenue and expenditure appropriations in fiscal year 2023 in Fire Miscellaneous Grants Fund budget in the amount of $51,081. And item 7, contract for surveying services of terminal expansion and parking structure project at the Santa Monica Airport Resolution Agreement. Recommendation of the council, A, authorize a Public Works Director to execute a professional services contract with Stantec Consulting Services, Inc., in the amount of $46,700 for surveying services to support the conceptual design of the terminal expansion and parking structure project at the Santa Barbara Airport, and authorize a Public Works Director to approve expenditures of up to $4,670 for extra services that may result from necessary changes in the scope of work. And B, adopt a resolution by reading of title only of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara, amending Resolution Number 22059, adopting the budget for fiscal year 2023 to increase expenditure appropriations for the terminal expansion and parking structure project at Santa Barbara Airport.
Very good. Does anybody from council need to pull an item? And do we have any public comments online for public comment?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. And with that, I will entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
So move.
Moved by Friedman, second by Alejandro Gutierrez. May we have a roll call? Do we need a roll call vote?
Councilmember, or excuse me, Mayor Rouse, you could do a voice vote on this since everyone is present.
Very good. All right.
I'm sorry, there are ordinances on here, so, yeah, I would prefer you do a
Okay,
do a roll
let's
call
do a
vote.
roll call vote then.
Yeah.
Very good. This is a motion for the entirety of the consent calendar. Motion by Councilmember Friedman, seconded by Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez. Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Snedden.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
And Mayor Rouse.
Aye. All right, very good. That concludes the consent calendar. Can we get a report from the ordinance committee, please? Councilmember Snedden.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. Had a special ordinance committee meeting. We heard
proposed changes to the membership criteria and quorum requirements of the Single Family Review Board. We carried the item to a future date that needs to be scheduled. We had public comment and did not do our deliberations yet. I will note that applications are open right now, and this board is in need of applicants, so just to make that note.
All right, very good, thank you. And we have the next item coming up. Madam Clerk, would you read the item, please?
Yes, item 10, fiscal year 2024, Human Services and Community Development Block Grant Funding Process, Priorities, and Criteria.
All right, very good, and I guess it looks like Ms. Doubles is making the presentation.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. My name is Laura Doubles. I'm the Housing and Human Services Manager for the city. Thank you for having us here today to present to you the Human Services and Community Development Block Grant Funding Process, Priorities, and Criteria for the upcoming fiscal year 2024 cycle. And on the screen is staff's recommendation. To summarize, staff is requesting council commit level funding in the amount of $726,150 from the city's general fund for the Human Services Grant Program, and approve the proposed application process and provide direction to the Community Development and Human Services Committee on funding criteria, priorities, and preferred allocation method. Approve 5% of the capital grants awards be charged to cover staff's project delivery costs, and authorize staff to open the fiscal year 2024 grant cycle and solicit proposals for both human services and community development block grants. Annually, the council authorizes the solicitation of funding proposals. They approve the process criteria and the priorities, and they establish the amount of human service funding commitment. The city awards grant funds from two funding sources: federal CDBG funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or otherwise known as HUD, and city human services funds that council makes available from the city's general fund. Both funds are allocated concurrently during this funding process. For CDBG funds, these are federal city entitlement grant awarded annually by HUD. 65% is eligible to fund capital projects, while only 15% is eligible to be put towards human services. HUD has stated that the purpose of CDBG funds is to build stronger and more resilient communities by providing low and moderate income individuals with decent housing, a suitable living environment, and or create economic opportunities. Capital projects includes infrastructure improvements, rehabilitations, and economic development. The city's specific priorities for CDBG funding were adopted in 2020 as part of the city's 5-year strategy for use of CDBG funds. They include homeless assistance to individuals and families and victims of domestic violence, public facilities and infrastructure to improve facilities of organizations that serve low and moderate income residents, and public infrastructure and parks improvements in low and moderate income neighborhoods, and in support of programs that provide self-employment training and small business loans. And on the screen here, you'll see a bar graph showing a historical perspective of our CDBG funding allocations. And we cannot predict the amount of new entitlement funding for fiscal year 2024 yet, and so for planning purposes, we are anticipating level funding for this upcoming allocation cycle. The committee generally makes contingency plans in its recommendations to the council in case of variances in the CDBG funding once we know our actual allocation. Human services funds are city general fund dollars council allocates to support human services activities, since the majority of CDBG funding cannot be used for this purpose. In addition to CDBG funds, council makes city human services funds available to support organizations that provide human services to city residents that are of low and moderate income. The City Human Services Fund is allocated by council annually and is augmented with the 15% CDBG Human Services Funds. On the screen, you'll see another bar chart with a historical perspective on the City Human Services funding that was been allocated. As you can see, the amount of funding for human services has been stable. Council has allocated $726,150 for the last 6 years, with a small dip in 2020 due to the pandemic. Staff is requesting this level funding again for this upcoming fiscal year 2024. The priorities for public human services are: first priority, programs that help meet basic human needs, specifically food, shelter and housing, and medical needs such as physical and mental. Second priority, the proposals that reduce the impact of violence and/or are preventative in nature and/or promote the highest degree of functioning the individual is capable of achieving. For over 30 years, the city has contracted with local agencies to provide essential human services. Back in the days previous, the Federal Revenue Sharing Program funded these services until it was eliminated in 1987. At that time, the council then committed to continue funding human services through the city's general fund and formed the Community Development and Human Services Committee. The city's stated anti-poverty strategy guides the city's funding policies and programs and is reported in many mandated reports to HUD. And it reads, the City of Santa Barbara's anti-poverty strategy includes both policy initiatives that address structural causes of poverty and the funding of economic and social programs that enable low-income clients to move towards self-sufficiency and end the cycle of poverty. This is enabled through funding and management of the city's human services grants and related programs. Some interesting facts on this last grant cycle's outcomes are on the screen and shown. A key demographic is to recognize that 47,135 people in total were served through these grants. 66% are minorities. This slide shows a further breakdown by program type. The data shows that a large amount of funding, 43%, was awarded to homeless services. However, only 12% of the people in that program type were served, showing that directing more resources to difficult-to-serve populations may not always produce the desired results of serving more people. And now we will discuss the Community Development and Human Services Committee and their role in the process. Every 5 years, the city is mandated by HUD as an entitlement jurisdiction to submit a 5-year consolidated plan. In that plan, the city is to assess the needs of the community in order to guide policy and direct the funding to assist the community with these needs. The focus group surveyed identified that the city needs public services that offer wraparound services in conjunction with other human service programs such as housing, youth, aging seniors, and undocumented residents. Self-sufficiency is key in addressing homelessness and prevention of additional homelessness from occurring. I will now read to you an excerpt of the city's consolidated plan of how the city intends to address these needs. The city's goal in this regard is to ensure that an individual or family has enough income, as well as knowledge, personal skills, and support systems necessary to secure safe and affordable housing, obtain quality childcare, fulfill education and employment goals, access physical and mental health services, save money for future needs, obtain nutritious food, acquire basic necessities such as clothing, and build strong, stable families. The city has continued to focus on self-sufficiency as its primary anti-poverty approach through the consolidated plan by administering existing programs and implementing initiatives for new human service programs. The CDHSC also helps in assessing these community needs by holding annual public hearings to invite anyone who wishes to provide input in this regard and then inform staff and council on the needs of the community. The funding recommendations are ultimately made to council by the CDHSC. Their role is to analyze and evaluate all grant requests and interview the applicants. They recommend to council which organization should be funded and by how much. Throughout the year, they monitor grantees' performances by reviewing performance reports and conducting site visits of the grantees. The CDHSC is made up of 13 members who represent a broad range of community interests, including representatives from neighborhoods designated as low and moderate income neighborhoods. To be eligible, applicants must be tax-exempt organizations or local units of government whose proposals directly benefit City of Santa Barbara residents. The council previously adopted the criteria shown here. Applicants must demonstrate their proposals benefit city residents who are of low or moderate income, address specific social or physical needs, present a marketing strategy with specific efforts to target ethnic or racial minority communities, show support from intended clients, identify all funding sources, including funding from other public or private sources, have reasonable administrative costs, and identify their geographical service areas. Organizations that pay staff with human services funding and meet the local minimum wage receive an extra point. One change for this year staff is recommending in order to conform to regulations is to add the item shown in red as an eligible criteria under Code of Federal Regulations 570.201. A full description of the criteria is in Attachment 1 of the staff report. Applicants will be evaluated and scored on these listed categories: past performance and administrative overhead, the composition of the board of directors and the board's level of involvement in the organization, the applicant's ability to provide bicultural or bilingual staff, the quality of service and program staff capacity, realistic, measurable results or changes that their clients will experience from receiving the applicant's services, that there is no duplication of service and whether the applicant collaborates with other agencies, and the committee will evaluate the financial stability of the applicant. And in addition, for capital projects, applicants will also be evaluated on that the project description must be clearly defined, meets federal, state, and local requirements, and is feasible. The applicant clearly states the need for the project and who will benefit from the project. And finally, the reasonableness of the project's cost and the project's viability without full city funding. As the CDBG and Human Services Grant Program is the city's established formal process for requesting funding from the city for all human and public services programs, staff is undertaking numerous efforts to ensure all eligible nonprofit organizations in the city know of our upcoming funding availability. Upon council approval, staff will send the notices to the mailing list that has service providers and interested applicants, publish an ad in the Santa Barbara Independent, issue a press release to local media, and put the notice on the city website news section. This opportunity will also be posted to the city's social media sites, City News and Brief newsletter, and the Santa Barbara Nonprofit Resource Network website, which is a resource hub for the nonprofit community countywide. This past Tuesday, September 27th, the CDHSC held their annual public hearing meeting, and all of the committee members were very interested in the Finance Committee's request, are reading up on the staff report submitted to council, and many will likely be viewing the council's discussion today. As part of the city's recent overall Vision 2030 fiscal sustainability initiative, staff presented an overview of the city's grant funding and processes to the Finance Committee on August 23, 2022, during the Community Development Department's presentation. At that time, the Finance Committee requested staff prepare an analysis of alternative funding strategies to be brought forward at the beginning of this next fiscal year grant funding cycle, and that is what we'll go over now. Staff has analyzed two suggested alternatives from the Finance Committee that day: fewer grants in greater amounts, and the possibility of establishing priorities to extend through multiple grant cycles. However, staff does recognize that there may be other possible alternatives as well that the council may wish to explore, and is happy to analyze other suggestions and return to report to the council at a later date. In preparation for the council's discussion today, staff surveyed the currently funded agencies on August 31 and found the following key takeaways. 91% address community needs identified in the city's 5-year consolidated plan. 56% leverage the city's funding to gain other funding. 73% will only be requesting the smaller amounts between $9,000 to $40,000 in the upcoming fiscal year 2024 cycle. 85% would be forced to reduce or eliminate their program, service, or staffing without the city's grant. 100% of their services are unique and not duplicated, and 100% collaborate with numerous other agencies. Alternative 1 is fewer grants in greater amounts. The method is to lower the number of agencies awarded and then provide more funding to each agency that is awarded. The possible benefits are that the awarded agencies can serve more clients and realize larger outcomes. Additional staffing can be hired for the awarded agencies. Staff time savings gained through reduction in number of grants, and less reporting required to HUD on fewer agencies. With this alternative, possible consequences may be staff will still process the same amount of applications and provide the committee with the same amount of support. 80% of applications received in the last cycle was for smaller amounts. There will be more unfunded agencies unable to sustain staff or operations. Skilled staff hired may be lost at the end of the grant, and future federal funding may be in jeopardy from lack of addressing identified community needs reported to HUD. In alternative number 2, it's to establish priorities to extend through multiple grant cycles. This method will enable the council to identify a priority or two or more that extend beyond a single grant cycle and fund that priority for possibly 3 to 5 or a predetermined amount of time, years. The possible benefits are that they can achieve greater progress on council priorities such as homelessness. Staff time savings would be realized through less applications received and funding on only agencies that address council identified priorities. There'd be less work for the committee in reviewing fewer grant applications and less reporting to HUD on fewer agencies supported. The possible consequences include a lack of funding for all the other agencies may result in a loss of agencies or services. Past years' data does not show greater outcomes were achieved with greater focused funding. The loss of other self-sufficiency programs may increase homelessness, and one good example of this is the city's rental housing mediation program, where staff works to prevent homelessness but are not considered direct homeless service providers. And future federal funding may be in jeopardy with the lack of addressing identified community needs reported to HUD. Upon Council's authorization today, a mandatory workshop will be held on November 8th, and at this orientation, staff will review the eligibility requirements and process for submitting a grant application. The applications will be available online starting November 9th and will be submitted by the agencies electronically online. The application deadline is December 7th, 2022 at 4:30 p.m., at which time the online system will be locked. Staff will review early submittals and provide feedback so that the agencies can correct any errors on their applications prior to the due date. And we are back at the staff's recommendation. That concludes my presentation, and I am here for any questions. Thank you.
Questions from council? Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you could pull up, I'll start with slide 31. Thank you for including the discussion at Finance Committee. It's pertinent to the discussion today, and I'll stick to questions right now. Since this came up at Finance and it's come up in all the departments overall, is our efficiency of our operations in staffing and with vacancies and just where we're going as a city, and we're trying to be more operationally efficient. And this has, this slide says staff time savings gained through reduction in number of grants, depending on what that number is. And when I looked at last year's, we had somewhere about 40 grants, a little bit less, I think, that were there. So if we reduce the number of grants, or actually, can you tell us what goes into when a grant is received? What is the staff work that is then required to follow through with that grant?
Sure, Honorable Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Friedman. We start by actually, when the applications come in, the staff is already in a mode of like reviewing and making sure that we're having all the, identify any problems with the application or needed information. The reason that we would see some staff time savings in this is because if we reduced the number of grants, we would still have to actually do the front-end work the same. We would still get, say, 50 applicants like we normally do, or roughly about that. We would still have to review and make sure we had all of that available to our committee. We would still provide the staff report just as normal to our committee through that whole process. What would change is if we only awarded, say, 10 out of the 50 applicants, then our staff on the back end would only have to basically administer those 10 grants.
And what does it mean to administer those 10 grants? What type of reports are there coming to council? Can you give us a better understanding?
Sure. Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Friedman. So what we normally would mean by that is that each agency is required to report to us on a quarterly basis on how their demographics that they've served and how they're doing as far as what the goals they set out with us and the committee is. So every quarter they send in that report, our staff has to review it and basically then they're submitting for a payment to be given to them. So we would go ahead and process that payment.
So that's last year about 40 grants, and so that would be 40 every quarter, and reviewing that on the staff time. And then is there any other reporting that needs to come out of these grants, such as coming back to council, going to HUD? What other what other staff work do we associate with these grants? And also, how many staff members are reviewing this? That's something that did not come up at Finance.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Friedman. So we have we have 1.5 basically staff that really does go over these reports. We actually do have an admin staff that helps us as well. And so their workload is, of course, a little more. This last cycle, I believe we had 44 from what I recall. And so what they basically, the time spent on those, though, is kind of, it is to review that report. However, it's very standardized, so each one is like looked at the same. You know, it's not like we have to pick it all apart or anything. It's there. And I think you said about the reporting. What we have to do with that is we do report to HUD, and mainly what we do is we have an annual action plan and a CAPR, which is a consolidated action report that we basically show our demographics on those grants of what we have served as far as populations and numbers on that.
Thank you. So there's significant work, but there is a process and a template for going through it. So thank you.
Correct.
If you could pull up slide 32. And did note that 80% of the requested applications are 30,000 or less, so that's important to understand. And generally that's the case. Has that been the case in past years? It's somewhere around that number in the 20 to 30 or so range.
Yes.
On the last bullet there, for the public, it says future federal funding in jeopardy with lack of city addressing identified community needs and HUD reporting. Can you help understand that? One is if we continued to have grants, but we had, say, fewer grants, not 5, but a significant number, but not 44, we would still be serving those populations in the community. And the previous slide showed that some of the benefits could be realized of improved outcomes. So I'm just trying to understand if we'd have HUD funding at risk or if some of the benefits would be reported to HUD as well, so it would offset some of the risks there. And then part 2, do other agencies have this type of funding, and are there some that don't, and how do they report their service needs to HUD?
Thank you, Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Friedman. As far as the other agencies, I'll take that one first. Most agencies, I know we've been really in contact with the City of Santa Maria a lot, and they run their whole grant cycle and process basically the same as what we do here. So they do fund a lot of different variety of agencies. As far as your first question, we have to report to HUD how we address what has been identified in our 5-year consolidated plan that's mandated as a produced report to HUD. The city does have a consultant that we've hired in the past. It's different ones, but basically they do our whole community needs assessment, and they identify where, you know, those needs are, what they are, and who's, you know, the population that we should be directing our funding to. So when we report that to HUD, they basically look to us to see, okay, every year, are you addressing that? How are you addressing that? So, for example, this past year, we submitted our annual action plan, and we were asked on how do we serve the HIV population. And what we were able to come back with is that we actually fund an agency in town that does serve that population. So by providing funding to a variety of agencies, we can go back to HUD and say we are addressing all of these different needs by funding agencies to provide those services.
With the HUD funding, does that is it specifically that we're providing funding to those agencies and they're looking at the issue, or are they specifically looking at outcomes, such as are we improving the outcome? Because it's one thing in that example you gave to say we're funding an agency that's doing HIV prevention, but are we reducing the number of HIV individuals in the city? Is that part of what they're asking for the data? So those are two different sets of outcomes that we're looking at.
Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Friedman, we do report all of that in our demographics that we collect every reporting cycle. Like I said, in the quarters, we collect that information so that we have that on file. And we don't necessarily report direct results as such, but we are always on an possibility of having an audit by HUD where they would come in and they would look to see what are the numbers and who was served.
Thank you. Just a few more questions. If you could pull up slide 33. So on the multiple grants, and I appreciate staff looking at this because we're talking about grants. 1 year, it was mentioned throughout the staff report in here that nonprofits might not make the type of investment because they're not sure they're going to get it the next year, or they'd be risk of losing staff. If we did a multi-year cycle, would that increase the stability for an organization and perhaps some of the results of outcomes we're trying to achieve? And then, yeah, I'll stop there. Do you think that would be something that might be able to help an organization achieve better outcomes for the populations we're trying to serve?
Thank you, Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Friedman. I might just start by saying that well, I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time? Because maybe I didn't get that.
So if we're extending the priorities for multiple years, so one is if an organization only has a 1-year grant, they might not move forward with a type of program where if they had a 3-year commitment,
yeah.
where they could make the investment over 3 years because they would have the stability and they could offer that staff member that opportunity for 3 years. And so one, would that enable them to look at things differently, the nonprofit organization, look at things differently and be able to make a longer term commitment and more resources to develop a program that could achieve better outcomes? And then the second part is with the priorities over multiple years. You mentioned the rental housing mediation as one that might not receive funding, but if we keep our funding priorities where we're saying we want to address the unmet needs of homelessness and housing and those, it seems that that could fit in those priorities that are already established. But that's maybe a comment for later. But if you could get to like the 3-year versus 1 year.
Right. Okay, sorry about that. So yes, the funding, the reason that I was going to start with that is that every year we do not know our allocation. We are only given that every year by HUD. We don't have a 3-year amount. You know, some grants you get like a 3 or 5 year estimate. This one, we don't have that. So this is totally up to Congress on what they see as their priority. And just in this past year, we noticed quite a cut in CDBG funding, but yet they gave us a little bit more in home funding. So we can't always rely on a certain amount. So doing a 3 to 5 year term would be very difficult because we don't know if we would be able to commit that funding without knowing what the amounts are.
Even with the human services funding is our general fund though, correct? Is it supplemented into the CDBG, or is it a separate grant? Because the CDBG is mostly capital, correct?
Yeah, the CDBG, 65% goes to capital, only 15% goes to human services. So what you all set aside for general fund goes straight to human services grants.
So we could make an adjustment if we were to go to, say, a 3-year model. And each year we would have to come back in the budget and adjust it. But if we said you're could put forward a 3-year, and the funding is this, and then the next year we'll adjust the funding, but it wouldn't be zero because we have our general fund in it. So we could make the commitment from our general fund and then supplement it later. So it wouldn't be an all or nothing. They could look at it for multiple years.
Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Friedman, that's essentially what you're doing right now. As Ms. Doubles showed you, we've kept our funding stable, and she has said that funding has varied. So council has been supplementing that money in times when it has decreased.
So there would be an option then to look at a 3-year grant versus a 1-year if we so chose to do that.
I just want to maybe mention too, with HUD, as long as we do all the requirements we're supposed to, we're not in jeopardy of not having that funding. But if we were to not do something that they are requiring, then we may be in jeopardy. I'm not saying we would be, but we may be.
Yeah, if we were to make significant changes, but if we were to kind of
Correct,
keep the program.
yeah.
Okay. And then the last question I have is, so for collaborative applications where you have multiple nonprofits that are maybe serving the same clientele but different type of service, is there an opportunity for collaborative applications to come forward and under one application? And so instead of us having 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 applications, you could have like say 3 that come together, and it's one application. Each nonprofit gets a certain part of it, but they're serving it so that one, it would be more efficient, but then they could apply for maybe a little bit more of a grant rather than say 10,000. They could apply for a little bit more, and then collaborate within the grant so that they are all working together on those populations. So is that something that currently happens, or is it something that we could advocate for?
And I'll go ahead and respond to this one. So Mayor Rouse and Councilman Friedman. So in response to that question, we already do have applications of that nature, and so with the both of us, STESA, and then also with the Santa Barbara District Attorney's Office, who goes out and do forensic interviews, they already collaborate with the CAC, and so it's ran under one entity. However, there's already collaboration where they basically ask for their support, and then they provide an invoice. And so we currently do that. And then also in response to, just to clarify a little bit on how we can respond to the anti-poverty, which HUD, that we say that we respond to from HUD, programs like the food bank, all of the food programs, those help with the food insecurity. And so if we are to focus just on housing and homelessness, then programs like that, we wouldn't be able to respond to HUD with on how we're addressing those needs.
Thank you. This is helpful because these weren't questions we were able to ask at the Finance Committee, and we had a lot more, and so reading the staff report, it kind of fleshed out a lot of the high-level discussion we had there and got a little more detail today. So I thank you for your answers.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Ms. Doubles. I'm confused frequently on the relationship of the 2 buckets of funding and our requirements with HUD. So don't these 2 programs stand independently of each other, and we just put general fund money in to supplement the outcome of the HUD programs? If HUD gives, I'm just going to make up numbers, HUD gives us $750,000, we have a responsibility for reporting and meeting their qualifications for that $750,000, but we can do whatever we want with our general fund money. Is that not true?
Thank you, Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Jordan. That is true to an extent. So you do have a pot of money that the council is committing to human services to supplement, because the pot of the CDBG cannot be used over 15% of that to help those human service agencies. So if we were to use your human services funds for other purposes, we couldn't basically claim that they are for human service agencies or providing human services. So I'm not sure if that is where, you know,
I don't know if that's the path I would take out of that. What would happen if we couldn't afford to commit $750,000 to human services? We would still be eligible for the HUD money and just do the HUD program according to their guidelines and requirements, right?
that is correct, yes.
Okay, so we have the ability to put money to that effort. We have the ability or the circumstance not to put money to that effort. The HUD program sort of stands on its own, according to HUD.
According to HUD, yes. However, HUD does want us to report how we would address community needs.
Sure. So on the alternatives pages that you just went through, when you're talking about a consequence being a future funding in jeopardy, you're really only talking about changes to the $750,000 of the HUD money, right? If we changed paths or did something contrary to HUD guidance or HUD requirements with their money, that would be the consequence of future funding problems.
Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Jordan, that is correct. However, there is a portion of that is that, like I said, in a report to HUD, we're supposed to identify how the city is going to address the community needs identified by the consultant in our consolidated plan. So if we don't have any way of addressing those, that's what I mean by you're in jeopardy.
But I understand it, so I'm just going to beat this to death. Our relationship with HUD and the requirements with HUD's money are one specific silo. We augment that argument with HUD that we're doing more with our $750,000 of general fund money, but that this is my question then, that $750,000 of that general fund money is, we have much more flexibility in making the argument that we're applying that to human services than the structure of the 15% of our $750,000 of HUD money, right? You follow what I'm saying?
Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Jordan, I still would have to go back to the fact that your money that you're supplementing with is addressing community needs.
No, I get that, but isn't it much more specific within the HUD framework of addressing community needs for that 15% than addressing community needs in a broad spectrum with our $750,000?
No.
Then how could that be if we could just take away our $750,000 and still run the HUD program,
I wish I could ask HUD.
right? Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Ms. Gutierrez.
Thank you. Could you, just for the purpose of deciding if we're going to go to alternative 1 and 2, could you walk us through how the community, what's the process for the committee to approve these grants that come in, or these applications, and how much time it takes for them to review it, and also talk about the site visits that goes along with these grants?
Absolutely. As a staff member, I'd love to respond to that. So Mayor Rouse and Councilwoman Gutierrez. So each year we go through the process, and so we're just about to kick off the process, and we usually receive, like as we stated, about 50 applications. Staff thoroughly reviews those. We look through their audit. We look through to make sure that they're fiscally sustainable and that they don't carry a huge amount of debt, and that it's not and then we look through their application. We make sure that they're going to have something that they're going to come back with and report against that they're going to accomplish throughout the course of the year. And so the first is staff. Then the committee, they review all of these applications. They come up, previously they came up with the priorities that were presented in front of you. And this year they've decided to keep with those priorities. However, they do know that this council meeting is occurring today. The applications are sent to the committee, they review them thoroughly, then in January, we kick off an interview process where each applicant comes and presents their application. The committee has an opportunity to ask them any questions. That takes, depending on how many applications we get, it takes 3 to 5 nights. We do a deliberation process, there's a voting process, they come up with their recommendations, and then they come back to you and present all those recommendations, after which then we work with the city attorney's office to execute contracts. And then after that, then we go into what Laura Doubles has mentioned of the quarterly reports. We do the 4 quarterly reports. We also, for our committee, we create a 6-month report and then an annual report so that they know how they're performing. And so the committee is very involved in the whole process. It does take a lot of time. It's a big community effort and something that they're very engaged in, is what I mean by that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. If there are no further questions with that, we'll go to public comment. First, I'd like to announce for those of you waiting online or listening online, if you would please raise your hand as quickly as possible so we can go through public comment and find out what you have to say. Our first in-person public commenter is Jacqueline Inda. Ms. Inda.
Mayor, Council, my name is Jacqueline. I'm here on behalf of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, along with the representation that we're doing with a project at La Casa de la Raza. And I'm here to call upon you with regard to the Human Services Funds. We know all of the statistics of all of the things that have happened with CDBG. It's clear that we're doing wonderful work, and that comes with the partnership of you, partnerships with education facilities and a lot of nonprofits. It's a lot of work. But the one thing that's missing is the conversation of gun violence. Not one single organization from CDBG actually is mandated to distribute or disseminate information on gun safety or safe storage. And in fact, they all serve the population that we're trying to reach. So one of the things that we ask that you consider is that in the criteria of human services funding, you prioritize or make it a priority within all of the different priorities you might have in front of you to fund gun violence prevention and gun violence prevention education. I know that this city has passed ordinances to make this community safer, but now it's time to step up into the role of actually putting our money where our mouth is and actually really doing something about getting the information out into the communities. I want to also inform you that in 2020 and in 2022, we didn't have a gun buyback. And this city was the first city and also the first city in the Tri-County region that provided that kind of support. Maybe some of the resources that were not used during those 2 years could be allocated into gun violence prevention. We're not asking for a specific project to be funded. We're asking for the priority to be identified within the funding source. That's one of the things that we want to make clear. Why? Because our community needs it now. And although that there are many different organizations that are providing different strategies coming together and brainstorming ideas that might come in a strategic plan in the future, the need is now. Our city is small enough for us to make an impact. And although we live in a region where gun violence seems to be more prevalent in other areas than ours, we start to see that increase in our communities and in our neighborhoods. I want to also remind you that with the sheriff coroner statistics, a lot of our gun violence situations happen with suicides. And we need to be able to continue to educate on safe storage and other sources of information and dissemination, not only on campuses, but in our community. Our schools are doing their part with passing resolutions and looking at ways to be able to disseminate information. But disseminating information costs and is a resource that we should be investing in. So I thank you for your consideration, and I hope that you will consider that as one of your top priorities.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have online speakers?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have one online speaker, Andrea Slabby. Andrea Slabby, please go ahead.
Hello. Hello, Council and Honorable Mayor. Thank you for taking the time today to discuss the CDBG grant. And thank you, Laura and Lindsay, for giving that presentation. On behalf of Organic Soup Kitchen, a nonprofit in Santa Barbara that distributes soup meals to low-income seniors and those with degenerative diseases, we have been a recipient of the CDBG funding grant for a few years now, and our services rely heavily on the funding from the city and CDBG grant. And we also partner and have increased partnership with over 25 other nonprofit organizations because of this funding we receive from the city. And an example of that would be, we have partnered with Santa Barbara Housing Authority. We're able to deliver soups to their low-income senior facilities. One example would be Via Santa Fe. They're located on the Mesa. We drop the soup off there and we label the soups individually, and the manager there will distribute it to the seniors in that community. And that is just one example of the nonprofits that we work with. We also work with People Self-Help Housing to get them their soup meals. So this grant is vital, especially for food insecure folks within Santa Barbara County. So I just want to say that focusing on food security is a huge effort along with the homelessness. It shouldn't be diminished as a diminished within these funding guidelines. Thank you kindly.
Thank you. Are there further online speakers?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Human or otherwise? Okay, very good. We will go back to council, and Ms. Snedden, you're first.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. Thank you, Ms. Doubles, for your thorough presentation. We had asked you to look at different priorities and different models, and you've done that and presented both the pros and the cons, which I really appreciate because it helped me decide for what my recommendations are. I really want to give a special thank you to the Community Development and Human Services Committee, such a hardworking, dedicated committee, and one of the hardest things to watch them do is to struggle through the decisions of who to say no to. And one of the things that's standing out to me in this process is that one of these possibilities would be limiting that down even further, which I'll say I'm not comfortable with. One of the possible consequences for looking at consolidating the funding and not spreading it further was that the agencies confirmed that the smaller amounts are needed the most, and that 100% of the services are unique and 85% would reduce or eliminate the services. So we would be losing unique services. And I think that's what's weighing on me the most. Not that these would be picked up someplace else, but that would be losing those unique services. And also the providing for a variety of agencies, giving us better coverage for HUD funding, even though we could always general fund or address that a different way. I think it's really valuable to have the support of HUD to receive that funding and to be good partners back. Soup Kitchen is one excellent example of meeting the needs of a wide variety of people, and that's possibly one of the ones, I'm not sure, that gives AIDS patients sustenance. So when you talked about all the multiple areas that with the HUD funding and just really our own priorities that would be important. For my recommendation on, and this is for discussion clearly, but for consolidating funding, I would ask us not to do that. I think we are doing major funding looks for sustainable funding for affordable housing, major looks for funding for homelessness issues and related to homelessness. And I think those funds really, to me, rightly come from other sources that we have and can leverage. And these are such small amounts, really, that I understand that the sort of temptation to put them all together, to put toward one funding, but then I'm not sure that little bit would make all that difference for that one topic. So for me, the hardest thing is saying who not to fund, and I'm not really interested in limiting that down further. And then for the priorities extending through multiple cycles, To the extent that we could do that for a 2-year cycle, I think that would streamline staff time and efforts, and I think it would lend stability to those multiple agencies. So I understand we don't always know what we might receive from HUD, but I think a 2-year cycle might be okay. But again, obviously, to the discussion of council. And then on priorities, I would support adding a priority of gun violence prevention, including suicide. I think that is something that is important in our community to continue to look at and address, and a small amount of funding in that could go a long way. So I think that fits in with the priorities. So just to summarize that, I would like to not consolidate the funds further, but yes to looking at multiple cycles.
Thank you. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to staff and the Human Services Committee for all the work that you do day in and day out. It's not just when you come into council, it's throughout the year. You do great work with the direction that we have, and the nonprofits in particular, we heard from some today, just providing the services directly to the people that need them the most, the residents of our city who have these unmet needs. And these are important discussions that we have up here on council, so I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach than my colleague, and just for discussion's sake, because it does come up in passing throughout the year, is how do we address these? And so there is an opportunity that's coming up to make some strategic shifts and changes that could help us address a lot of needs, our needs, including in another area in housing. And so Councilmember Harmon and I have been discussing this, and thought it would be worthwhile to have a discussion today. Where the council goes with it, it's up to us, but just wanted to raise these thoughts for us to consider as we approach the program for another couple of years, or a year or more. So I'll start with the priorities, the funding priorities, and I'm supportive of adding the gun violence into the priorities. And my understanding is that those are what guide the eligibility of the nonprofits that are seeking a grant. And when I look at the first priority from last year, that's recommended, which was the same as last year, was programs that help meet basic human needs, specifically food, shelter, housing, and medical. Someone like the Organic Soup Kitchen would be eligible for that, and so I don't see that changing. I think it is a huge need, and so so I think that covers a lot of what we were talking about, and I think that by not changing the priorities, with the one addition, it allows everyone who applied last year to apply again for it. I am interested, and Councilmember Harmon, when you speak, feel free to supplement what I'm saying. I'm trying to look at this generally from our discussions, and is that a 3-year grant would be helpful for the organizations that are providing the services, because they could look a little bit bigger than what they are if they had a smaller fund. And with that, it means looking at their staffing, at their capacity. They could grow their programs, because they would look at, no matter what, we're talking right now the general fund dollars that we have. So there would be a commitment of those. And so with that, stability would allow them to try new things, try to have better outcomes, try to reach the individuals with unmet needs, but also have the ability to grow a program over a year or two and get other funding from other philanthropy, from foundations, from others, to really make some changes. And I think it's something that we need to at least have a discussion and see if that's something we would like to promote. And then as part of that 3-year cycle, we would report back to council annually as part of this on, hey, is it working? What are some adjustments we would need to make? And of course, like, we would look at what the HUD funding coming in and that, but then you would make those adjustments. So that's part of it. The other part of this proposal is that in order to do that, in looking at last year's grants and the staff report today, a vast majority of them, I think you said 80% or so, are in that under $40,000 range. And when we're looking at trying to have these larger grants, I think a $25,000, you can do a lot with 25. And that allows that capacity to build. And it also looks at the staffing issues that we have. Because at the Finance Committee, as we've learned from the 3 departments that have presented, and overall, we have a lot of staffing challenges. We're looking at operational efficiencies and effectiveness, and our staff are overworked. They just are, in terms of all the responsibilities on their plate. And so this is one opportunity where we could perhaps have some new outcomes and really look at an operational efficiency in terms of reducing not down to 5 or 10, but with a 25,000 minimum, you could really still have a significant number of applications that are coming in, and it addresses an operational efficiency that we're seeing within our city organization that isn't going to change, and we need every little thing we do to change that adds up over time in terms of getting us to where we want to be down the line. So the last part, and I need to word this correctly, Ms. Connect, because it has to do with reducing the amount of the 726 by, I'd like to have a discussion on this, $250,000, and then come back, and that would go to an affordable housing trust, and direction to come back later on using that to put that into a trust, into our affordable housing trust, and use it as an opportunity to work with philanthropic organizations to provide matching funds for housing opportunities. And if we did that over a 3-year commitment as well, so that'd be $250 for 3 years. But again, we would need to come back and have a larger discussion on that. But the reason why that comes up now is that in terms of housing and homelessness, which all these funds and grants are addressing in particular, as well as food security and a lot of other things, is that the foundations and philanthropy are seriously discussing right now and considering the role of philanthropy in addressing these very issues. And to have an ability to bring momentum to a public-private partnerships, to enhance the resources of partnerships between the cities and outside entities, to increase our availability for housing funds as well as potentially these funds, I think it's an opportunity. And if the city was able to say, hey, we're moving in that direction, that would give momentum to these. There's some new reports that are coming out on this and recommendations and others. So those are things I'd like us to have a discussion on that tonight if we're open to that. And Mr. Mayor, that's what I have for now. So.
Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm going to first just echo my thanks to Ms. Stubbles and Ms. Drews and the whole Human Services Committee. It's clear how much work you all do year-round, and it's really always like one of the best days we have on council, seeing both of you. So really appreciate it, and appreciate your willingness to have these hard conversations. I think we can already tell that's what they are. They're hard conversations, but they're absolutely critical. Councilmember Friedman did a good job of articulating, I guess, sort of the broad contours of what we had discussing here today. But I'll just say I support adding gun violence to the list of priorities. I appreciate that, Ms. Inda. I support considering offering a longer-term goal. I think that could really allow organizations to build capacity. That's a good idea. I very much appreciate and understand the concerns that have been identified with lowering the threshold for a grant amount. I am interested in having a discussion, I guess we're having it right now, understanding all that goes into it. What are the outcomes that can be improved with a higher threshold? That's still the question that, for me, really wasn't answered. I don't know that you can answer it. So it's certainly not a criticism, but I can't help, even as I think about the positives and negatives, the big elephant in the room, the big thing that's being left out of that conversation is how are the people who are being served better? Are they going to be served better if we increase the grant threshold? So I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think that was something that has been adequately addressed, and I'm interested, maybe even on a pilot basis, of trying that out. Now, that said, if there's not will to do that, I think that to me is, it's just an idea, and it may not be a good one, so I can leave it with that. But I do want to take a few minutes maybe more than a few minutes, though I'll try to be as brief as possible to give some additional context for what we are proposing on the funding reallocation and why we are proposing it and why we're proposing it specifically today in the context of the Human Services funding commitment process. I'll say at the outset that I know this is a big change that we would be proposing to reduce the general fund allocation by $250,000 a year for 3 years. I know that it wouldn't come without significant impact on our nonprofit partners who, by the way, do absolutely incredible and absolutely critical work in our community. But I do want to encourage us to remember how important it is for many reasons, including ongoing budgetary issues, staffing challenges, that we truly try to be as strategic as possible in allocating those general fund taxpayer dollars in service of city residents. So with that in mind, I'm trying to think through what's the most prudent and strategic use of our budgetary resources in this context. And to me, I believe that the answer to that is a public-private partnership in the form of an affordable housing trust. If we've heard it once, we've heard it a dozen times. Investment of city funds into affordable housing, especially when made in partnership with our philanthropic community, will pay dividends many times over. Those funds can be leveraged to access funding streams and programs in ways that other dollars simply can't, and those leveraged dollars will get affordable housing built, residents into permanent homes in service of the priorities that we have identified, not just this year, but many years over and over and over again. I also believe this plan to commit city dollars and then work with philanthropic partners to get matching funds, to encourage other philanthropic partners to participate. This is a force multiplier. That's what we've been looking for. That's what we need in service of this housing crisis. It's a force multiplier in terms of community buy-in and community engagement. Yesterday, we all received a report, I think we all received a report from the Bauer Foundation and Romo and Associates, and it looked at areas where philanthropy specifically can be impactful in preventing and addressing homelessness. It was a really well done report. I recommend everyone who hasn't read it should read it. There was a lot in there. But it's particularly relevant in today's conversation because it highlights the key gaps in the system and the potential for philanthropy and public-private partnership to help fill those gaps. The report reiterates some things that we all know in this housing market. If you lose your housing, the chances of finding a new place and being able to afford it are minuscule, and the cycle continues and continues and continues. Interestingly, this report recommends, in particular, of course, among other things, that the philanthropic sector here in our community consider social impact investment to support affordable housing development. This is directly aligned with the suggestion that Councilmember Friedman and I are making today. And our conversations with philanthropic partners previous to this meeting have been incredibly exciting. They are ready for a municipal partnership that looks like this. The details, of course, need to be hashed out. I think that's why Councilmember Friedman suggested that we just earmark this and come back with really how this would look and get approval from the full council at that time. But the theory behind it is this. The investments into this fund will then be used as investments into affordable housing projects. They will make a modest return, grow the fund, all while producing the housing that we know we desperately need. I've been advocating for the creation of this kind of loan fund for years now, and the crisis is acute. The participants are willing. That's a huge change. The participants are willing, and I really believe that the moment is now for us to do this. Just a little bit more here. I know that it's not easy to make these strategic choices, and even as I sit here advocating for this, I'm struggling to do it because I know what it means, and I know how important all of the services that are provided in the community are. But I believe the city has to send a message to its philanthropic leaders and really to everyone that we will invest in them, that we are bought in, And we can't solve the housing and homelessness crisis alone, but by partnering with that philanthropic community, we can do so much more. The creation and allocation of resources in this type of fund, is really central, in my opinion, to proving our commitment to those priorities that we have laid out year over year. So I guess I'll just close by saying that I would ask all our colleagues, though I know it's difficult, to really consider this new approach and to give us an opportunity to pursue it in a meaningful way with the partners who have already expressed interest. We have an opportunity right now to engage, leverage, and multiply the impact of this funding, to engage the broader community and the philanthropic sector in ways that haven't been done before, to leverage city dollars in the way that only city dollars and a city commitment can, not just with matching donations, but through subsidy and government grant management and tax credit financing and more. And finally, to really multiply our impact. I know that's what we're all looking to do, to be part of coalition building, to lead that coalition building, quite literally to build homes, to build affordable homes in service of permanent housing solutions that will allow us to finally look at these priorities and say we have made a meaningful difference for our neighbors. So we've got some big problems, and I think for me it's time we take a big swing at them. So thanks for your consideration.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My arms are exhausted, right? I'm all in on what you just heard. I think that's a great idea. The devil's in the details. I'm a little concerned you're going to listen to this and then look at that paragraph in your staff report that says you want a year notice, which is going to annoy me. I sat first in this chair 2.5 years ago, a couple months into being elected, at the tail end of this process, and brought up at that time my uneasiness with awarding $750,000 to like 40 different organizations, and the what I saw as the economy of empowering greater impact on less allocations for more money. One of your lines in your slides says, well, for example, we've done that with the homelessness and we haven't seen any impact. And my retort to that would be, well, then what the heck are we still funding homelessness for if your own records show that we're having little impact with more and more money there? I still believe that that there's an opportunity to change this program, and you know, if this is an easy out to start that process, we just take some money and get it out of there and then let you go with the rest of the remaining money in the process. I'm still telling you, you needed to be here months ago to have this conversation. Your program where you're meeting in several weeks or a month already to start this and not giving opportunity for discussion and direction change between now and then is I think you've heard multiple times that there needed to be a bigger discussion on the way this was going to happen. Generally, my number one priority is the impacts of homelessness, both on those who are unhoused and the community. And if I had my druthers on the human services priorities, I would put that shelter and housing as a single priority. And then I would shove everything else in there, the human needs, the food, the medical, into the second priority. And then I'd take the second priority and move it to a third priority. That's what I would see as the number one social catastrophe staring us right in the face. So that's where I'd like to go eventually, and I'd like to go eventually to acknowledging that historically feeling comfortable to come in and make a $30,000 ask is pretty safe, but we're encouraging you to come in and make a couple $100,000 ask or $250,000 ask, and we're willing that if that ask is really good, that we'll commit for multi-years of funding for that ask. So it turns its on its heel a little bit from a bunch of little programs and little allocations to several programs that, in theory, it's your job to rate those and then follow up on those, that in theory can collectively make a bigger impact than those little programs are making. But if this is the avenue for an out today with this timeline, then I definitely would support an affordable housing trust. It's got to contain a homeless component in addition to a low-income component, because I'm desperate to engage people in this process like Dignity Homes, Salvation Army, and PATH, whether it's a duplicate of the Dignity Moves, the Dignity Homes project, whether it's greater shelter beds available that free up the rest of our resources to actually do things with the homelessness and reduce the impact. So I'd be willing to follow this path. But I'd also sure like to see in what you start with next month that you allow people the freedom to come in and make a multi-year ask for a greater amount of money. I think everybody right now is in a comfortable spot where they historically have seen 44 people, $30,000. We know that's a sweet spot. We know we're pretty good. We just gotta do our application really good. I doubt anybody's very confident to say, hey, I got this real program that I think will make a difference, but I need $150,000, and they want to take a chance on doing that and going through the process, and it's a shame, I think. So, so those are my comments. But I'm fully behind pulling the $250,000 out of the general fund allocation, and then bringing back a conversation on what an affordable housing trust looks like. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. So I also would like $250,000 to fund an affordable housing trust. Absolutely, yes. I have moved that more than once in the past couple months. Let us please not take it from this fund. The reasoning I'm thinking is that it should come from where there is a nexus for what creates that need. We have issues with luxury homes, with vacant second homes, with tourism industry. There are a lot of areas that contribute to this need that isn't this. Let's not take from one fund that alleviates some of these issues to put it to another fund that alleviates some of these issues. For all the reasons that Councilmember Harmon articulated so well, and I'm completely in support of, we need this affordable housing trust. Absolutely, 100% on board. I do not want that to come from this fund. I think we should just do $250,000 general fund allocated. I think for a long time, I think that we should have done that. Or through the housing element update, we tasked staff with coming back with a sustainable funding source. That was Councilmember Harmon's suggestion. I would have rather have moved the funding that day, but it went to, let's come back and look at sustainable funding sources for that. Absolutely, that $250,000, I am committed. I don't want to take it from these services that are being provided to this very same community. To me, I want to add the $250,000. So when it comes to it, if we could just consider that it's not being taken from this process, I would appreciate that we could move that separately, because 100% we need that fund. I'm interested in hearing back from staff. We've never gotten a report back from our housing element update tasked with, what is the sustainable funding source? I'd sure like to hear that back, but every time something comes up, sustainable rental protections and possibly looking at $200,000 fund to look at that study, and we said no, not that $200,000, and I moved then. Let's take that $200,000, which has a nexus to housing, to move towards that. So I appreciate that you're allowing the latitude to come back with this. I think to bring this in this moment, I understand it. I've tried every moment that's possible to throw in that 250,000. I think what we have to acknowledge is that it's a priority, and let's just make it a priority and not take it from these funds, which are so sorely needed by all these different organizations.
All right. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I've always looked at this process gratefully that there was so much work that went into it. But I was always still frustrated by doling out so many small amounts to so many as opposed to more bang for your buck. It is hard to generate when you have a $5,000, $10,000, $12,000 grant, whatever we do, and see what the really true impacts are. And I know we have probably more nonprofits in this town than per capita than probably anywhere, and there's a lot of people who do a lot of great work. And like I said, I've always really thanked, especially the volunteer work of the committee, because they put so much time into this. But I would support a simpler, smaller number of applicants with bigger asks, and I think the multi-year ask thing is compelling. Now, whether or not that's dedicated towards a housing trust fund or whatever, clearly the housing is something that is on everybody's lips every day, all the time, and I see the desire to do that. We are working with a very short porch here time-wise, and I don't know what can be done. Well, I guess we can do whatever we want, but I mean, what's the right thing to do at this stage of the game? I'm up for suggestions. I'm assuming that some of you have got something like a motion in mind, and I'd be interested to hear what that would be. I know this is a big game changer for staff, and I am sensitive to that. But like I said, I've always thought about a larger chunks going to fewer people would be a lot more impactful than spreading this out like so much confetti over so many different asks. So with that, I will go to Mr. Friedman. Oh, yes or no, Ms. Gutierrez. Alejandro Gutierrez first, please. Go right in. You've got the floor.
I'm going to ask a question just for clarification. Could you give us examples of the nonprofits that receive amounts of like $10,000? Like right off, like, yeah.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Mayor Rouse and Councilwoman Gutierrez. So right off the top of my head, ones that I've recently spoken with, so Planned Parenthood, right in the, and this is in the realm, I can't remember exactly how much they receive, but in the realm of between $15,000 to $9,000. So Planned Parenthood, United Boys and Girls Club, Standing Together to End Sexual Assault might receive less than that. Family Service Agency, the Older Nutrition Program for Food Bank.
That's good enough.
Okay, there's a lot of others as well because, but just off the top of my head.
So just to be clear, Ms. Hartman, can you just very briefly explain your proposal and very clear, like, because I understand, but I want the public to really understand what's being proposed in the table. And sometimes we can get lost in a lot of the discussion. So just your proposal for the council right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I used a lot of words too, so I'll try to use less. So I think the major proposal, and I appreciate the comments, Councilmember Snedden too, on this, is to look at $250,000 of the general fund money that we allocate toward this process and earmark that for an affordable housing trust over 3 years. So $250,000 a year for 3 years, $750,000 total. The purpose of that would be in an effort to make significant headway on the stated priorities as we've identified them in a meaningful, permanent way. And then simultaneously, with the conversations that we've had with philanthropic partners, they are ready to meet us, match that if possible, close to that, and to be partners in that trust fund. And it's, the moment is now, in my opinion. And I would just emphasize that in no way is this at all meant to take away from the critical work that's done, or to really say we're going to fund these people less. It's really about saying we've got these problems. We haven't been serving people in a permanent way. We haven't necessarily been doing the most that we can do with our money. Is it time to consider potentially, with this small, relatively small portion, a different way? There's also been discussion of the extended grant opportunities, so 2 to 3 year cycles, and then maybe, and I'm not sure, I think this is a longer conversation, I couldn't tell where everyone was, but potentially increasing the grant threshold amount. But I think for me, the key piece is that $250,000.
And Ms. Nedden, you're proposing that there's other pockets of city funding that we can take this money out of?
I'm proposing that we, in the housing element update, tasked staff, and Councilmember Harmon made the motion and the ask to come up with a sustainable funding source. Perhaps this is what the proposal of the sustainable funding source is. I'm not real clear on that, but I thought we might hear options of where we'd be carrying it from. And I would be interested in making a motion to just have the $250,000 dedicated from the general fund and not affect this process, or to increase this funding amount to the whatever 950,000 to accommodate. But I'm not interested in lowering the number of this fund.
Thank you. And I just want to make a comment. I work in the public school system. We work hand in hand with the nonprofits, and I'm very aware that we have a lot of nonprofits. I sat in that committee for over probably 5 years, or a little bit more, and I understand the work that goes into this process. And the committee members, they are very dedicated, and they're very knowledgeable of the nonprofit works that is out there. In the process that I was in the committee, I realized how that those 10,000, those small amounts that were granted to the nonprofits really made a huge difference. But in the city of Santa Barbara, we have a problem where there's a lot of nonprofits doing similar work, and I really like the comment that Mr. Friedman said, what are the outcomes? So we're serving the same population, but what exactly is the outcome? I really think that we need to, I think this is a longer discussion. I do agree with Ms. Nedden that I don't think we should really touch this funding. I would really like to see the report from staff on the housing element. But I also agreed with Mr. Jordan that we need to start holding these nonprofits accountable, that they shouldn't get comfortable in counting on this money for every year. They need to start to think very strategical on where to fund these positions, because a lot of the funding that also goes out there, it also goes to their staff. And so that's where I stand. I would like to hear from other colleagues.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you for the comments from my colleagues. This is a healthy discussion, and I appreciate the deliberations that we're going into. So it was a tough issue to bring forward. Councilmember Harmon and I debated for a long time, and all the pros and cons on it, for these very reasons, and for the pros and cons that were presented in the staff report and from our colleagues here today. And it's not something that I take lightly on what we're proposing in terms of the dedicated housing, or to the housing fund. But what swayed me is, one, there's this report that came out from the Bauer Foundation that's referenced, and discussions we've had with some of the other leading foundations here. And right now, there is a lot of momentum and discussions that are going into how philanthropy can really make a larger impact, as we heard from Councilmember Harmon earlier, in terms of impact investing and addressing the housing issue and also homelessness. They're intertwined significantly. And when you're talking about the power of public-private partnerships, having the city be at the forefront as those discussions are taking place so that we can demonstrate our commitment to looking at what we can do as a city and what they can, then that builds on their momentum of what they can do outside of a city process with their private dollars. And neither one would be taking on the role of the other. We would be coming together. And that's going to take some time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but at the same time, we need to ensure that the momentum of those conversations doesn't stall out. And it's the critical timing that's taking place that convinced me, and I won't speak for Councilmember Harmon, but the timing is now, and she kind of referenced that, to move this. And I know that there's, Councilmember Sneddon mentioned just fund it from the $250,000 just to do it, but that adds to the structural budget issues that we have that we've been discussing in depth at finance. So this was a way to look at both the unmet needs and service delivery, but also look at leveraging significantly the dollars we need to start developing housing and other needs. So, what I have as for consideration today would be a 3-year grant program cycle with minimum grant asks of $25,000. And I'm not making the motion yet, I'm just putting it out there. Report back to council annually as to how this is working. And there's a lot that could come into that, because if we did look at the housing element and there was other funding, then we could adjust that and we could look at the Affordable Housing Trust or this program if there was other funding identified for future years. But for now, we don't have that in front of us, but we do have this momentum with the foundation. So report back annually, keep the priorities the same as the staff recommendation with the addition of adding gun violence. Like Proposal 2 says, second tier funding priorities that reduce the impact of violence, and you can add it right there, including gun violence and suicide. I think that was mentioned as well. And then the big one is to reduce the $726,000 by $250,000 and direct that would go back in the general fund and give direction to come back to council with a discussion of what that $250,000 would be used for in the context of the Affordable Housing Fund. We can't have that discussion tonight. It's not noticed on the agenda, but it is a larger discussion because there are a lot of different ways that it could go. But the impact of making a 3-year commitment right now, and there are other opportunities that we're looking at finance to grow that, would send a strong message to not only the philanthropic community, but to the community in general, that we are taking the housing crisis seriously. And I just feel it would be a missed opportunity to not do that today, if that makes sense to everyone.
Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I'm just going to ask that we address each of these questions as separate motions so that we can weigh in on them individually.
When you say these questions, you mean the questions on as staff proposed them, or?
Well, the things we've been talking about is the extension of the time of the cycle, the minimum threshold of the ask, and then the $250K earmarked.
Okay.
There may be other that need to be split out too. But I'm just going to try this, and maybe there's a second, maybe there isn't. But I'd like to increase the funding to $976,000 to this fund, with $250,000 earmarked for Affordable Housing Trust.
So is that
That's a motion.
That's a motion, okay. And is there a second?
Was worth a try. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jordan. 1 minute. Ms. Gutierrez, you have your light on. Are you waiting to come? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Jordan.
that was a motion from Mr. Friedman, I'd be supportive, but I'd also ask that we, it would seem to me for the $500,000 that's left over for the current process, that the timeline's already well underway, there'd be an easy adjustment to allow those entities to also put in RFPs or applications for multi-year consideration. So they could continue to do their, whatever they're going to do, their $30,000 a year, but if they want to also get scored, graded, and look for approval on a multi-year program, I think that's also, that, without, you can talk about the size and the scope of the allocation, you can talk about the certainty of having an ongoing 2 or 3 year program. They both kind of wash either of my hands for me. They're both are beneficial. They're beneficial to the clients they're serving. They're beneficial to the programs because it's like anything else, it's certainty. So if we could include that, that would be even better.
Mr. Friedman.
Okay, I think we can include that. So I can make a motion, I can split it up, but this is what the motion would be, and if we need to take some separate votes on it, open to that. But
Ms. Gorman needs a moment here. You good? All right.
okay, so here's what I'll put into the motion, and if we need to split it up, anyone speak up. That we put a 3-year grant program that reports back to council annually, a minimum grants of $25,000. Organization can apply for multiple grants if they want to apply for their previous grant for 1 year and submit a new multi-year grant. That would be encouraged. And keep the priorities the same as presented in the staff report, with the addition of adding gun violence and suicide prevention, and then reduce the 726,000 general fund by 250 and move that to the Affordable Housing Trust and come back to council for a full discussion on how that could be appropriated from the Affordable Housing Trust. Okay. On all of them or just the last one? Okay, so that's what's in there. So I'll make the first motion is for a 3-year grant program.
Okay, we have a motion from Friedman.
And I will second that, but Mr. Mayor, may I ask
Second.
a question?
Yeah, you second, and then you have
Second,
discussion.
and then I'm going to ask a question not specifically related to that
second.
motion. Thank you. I want to ask, in your professional opinion, if the motion passes to do this reallocation of the $250,000 funds, do you recommend that we not at the same time increase the grant threshold, given that there's still going to be the same number? I mean, in your opinion, would we be better off not touching that if we also do the $250,000? Right, then I think we're going to do that.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse and Councilwoman Harmon. So a couple different things with the going into the grant cycle. If we were to increase the thresholds, that would be fine as far as staff goes and our how we would need to operate the program. I would recommend some guidance to our committee if we're going to be doing a 3-year grant cycle, and some applicants might choose to only apply for 1 year, and some applicants might choose to apply for 3 years. What council direction would be for the priority? And I believe that answers the question thoroughly. But if I didn't answer all of it, please tell me. Thank you.
All right, so, Mr. Friedman, are you still on the floor on this motion then?
Yeah, so the motion would be, based on that, a 3-year program with priority giving to multi-year grants. Does that answer your question? Priority given to multi-year proposals.
So,
That's a motion.
if we have an amended motion then, is that? Or is
I'll
that-
withdraw the original motion and start over.
Okay, so,
And you, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Friedman, Councilmember Friedman, and reporting back annually is still part of your
Yes, I'm
motion?
reporting back annually to the council.
Okay, so I'm not clear on, do we have a motion on the floor? Do we?
I'm making that motion for a 3-year program with priority for multi-year projects and report back to council annually.
Okay, that's a first by Friedman, second by Harmon. Madam Clerk, do you have the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor and Council, I have a motion by Councilmember Friedman, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Harmon, for a 3-year grant program with priority given to multi-year projects with reports back annually to the City Council.
Okay, and that's all we're doing so far. And then Ms. Sinan, are you ready? To the motion, please. Yes, please do.
Thank you. I would support it at 2 years, not at 3.
Okay, back to the maker
We're
of the
fine
motion.
with, we can amend it to 2 years. I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, first, second, both amend, so that is the new motion. And let's then go ahead and, should we vote on this motion and get that out of the way?
Yes.
And move on. That'd be just dandy. Okay. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Very good. Motion by Councilmember Friedman, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Harmon, for a 2-year grant program with priority given to multi-year projects with reports back annually to council. Yes?
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez. And Mayor Rouse.
Aye, okay, that passes unanimously. Now, shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Friedman.
So the minimum grants of 25,000, based on the discussion, I'm comfortable with leaving it as it is since it's a change this year, and just, the goal was to try to get larger grants, but I think that the nonprofits will adjust as they see needed, so I don't think we need to force that this year, and then we can later on get it. So I'm going to not move that at this time. And then keep the priorities as recommended in the staff reports. That was slide 13. But with the addition of adding gun violence prevention and suicide prevention.
So that's a move by Friedman, second by Sneddon. Are we clear, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. That is a motion by Councilmember Friedman, seconded by Councilmember Sneddon, to keep the priorities as recommended in staff report slide 13, but with the addition of gun violence prevention and suicide prevention.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask the city attorney, this confusing times, does that require a roll call vote, or may we do that with a voice vote?
I would prefer a roll call vote
Okay,
at this
then
point.
we will.
Thank you.
Very good, Madam Clerk.
Very good. On that motion regarding priorities, Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon.
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Mayor Rouse.
Aye. All right, that passed unanimously, and the wellspring of motions is still on the floor. Mr. Friedman.
And for the final would be to allocate 250,000 from the general fund 726 already approved and allocate that to the Affordable Housing Trust with direction to come back to council with recommendations on appropriating the funding into the Affordable Housing Fund with a focus on public-private partnerships.
Okay, first by Friedman, second by Harmon. I have a question for clarification on the motion. The money is going to be held in a trust. Is there a
It's in the city's Affordable Housing Trust
the
Fund.
city's affordable housing trust? And then does that, will that require then an additional application cycle for?
Right now, it would be held there till we come back to council and decide,
Okay, all right,
decide
so
how we
that's,
want
I don't want to get out of the.
do that, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Freeman, could I just make a clarification? The motion is to reduce the commitment of the 726,000 down by 250,000, and then to earmark that for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but to return to council with further discussion on the allocation to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Is
You
that
said it
correct?
better than I could, so yes.
And
Very good.
Mayor
Ms.
Rouse, council members, with permission, staff would actually recommend that you make a recommendation to direct us to return with establishment of a new fund and the rules governing the use of that fund. That Affordable Housing Trust Fund already has a number of rules that might get, so it would be a new fund to deal with this money in the purpose that you're talking about doing it.
Yes, and
Thank you.
how do we need to, can someone state that?
So I would recommend that it would be, staff would return to council with the proposal to establish a new Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That's a fund we don't have right now. So it would be an Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Can I add something to that?
Um,
When we come back to council on this affordable housing, I would like the private funders to come and give a presentation on that report that our council colleagues have.
Okay.
Yeah, we
All right,
can,
that-
yeah, we
that's-
can reach out to
That's not part of the
funders.
motion, that request. Okay.
We'll reach out to the funders.
To the motion, Ms. Sneddon.
To the motion, well, this is far too momentous not to support. I mean, I've been asking for this type of funding for a very long time. I want to earmark right now, though, and I don't want to be hassled for it at budget time, that I'm coming in with some crazy wackadoodle proposal that I'm going to ask that we make this fund whole again. And we can do that through the budget cycle, and I'm going to bring that back, and I really genuinely don't want to hear that I didn't mention it ever until that day, because I want this fund to be whole. But to get $250,000 for a new fund towards affordable housing is momentous, so it has my support.
Consider your colleagues admonished. So- Very good. All right, we have a motion on the floor, first and seconded. Madam Clerk, are we clear on the motion?
Mr. Mayor, let me give it a shot here to be corrected by
Please.
Ms. Connect and Councilmember Friedman. Okay. Motion by Councilmember Friedman, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Harmon to, and please cut in here, to allocate $250,000 of the approximately $726,000 already approved to a new affordable housing.
Madam Clerk, could I
Yes,
rephrase that to reduce the $726,000 by $250,000 commitment?
Yes. So if we have here a motion by Councilmember Friedman, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Harmon, to reduce the $726,000 by $250,000 and to provide direction, and to provide direction to staff to return to council with a proposal to establish a new affordable housing trust fund for that $250,000.
Sorry, can we say to earmark those funds for use in that? I want to make sure that they don't just go.
And maybe, City Attorney Connect, would you like to rephrase that all into one big thing? Or
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman?
Sure, it could be, it's to reduce the approximate $726,000 by $250,000, and to earmark those funds for an affordable housing trust fund, and to direct staff to return to council with a proposal to establish that fund, a new affordable housing trust fund.
Very,
Yes.
very good. I don't need to repeat that if everyone agree. Would you like me to,
If you're clear on it, I'm fine going with the vote, or do you need to repeat the motion? I think
if,
it was, okay,
okay, then,
please do.
then City Attorney Connect, if you can try it again. I have, part of that was going to rely on the video. That's
Okay.
fine.
So the motion would be to reduce the approximate $726,000 fund by $250,000 and earmark that $250,000 to an affordable housing, to a new affordable housing trust fund, and direct staff to return to city council with a proposal to create a new affordable housing trust fund.
All right, very good.
Very good.
Madam Clerk, when you're ready, we'll take the roll call vote, please.
All right, thank you. City Attorney Connect. Okay. Motion for that, roll call for that vote as just restated. Mayor Pro Tem Harmon.
Yes.
Yes. Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
Yes.
Councilmember Friedman.
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon.
Yes.
And Mayor Rouse.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Freeman, do you have anything else to say? Okay. All right, well, that was a biggie. Let's move on to council and staff communications. Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended with my colleagues, Mike Jordan, Mayor Rouse, Alejandra Gutierrez, and Eric Friedman, the swearing in of our new police officers. It was really good to see that the majority of them were locals from Santa Barbara. It's exciting to see that our streets are going to be policed by people who grew up here. I also attended the 13th anniversary of the Qatar Sister Cities at the Academy of the West with Mayor Rouse and Councilmember Sneddon. And I attended the Carpinteria Avocado Festival, which is great to be back there in person. And I also attended the SB Youth Council, and they discussed their training with gender sensitivity. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I attended a Cox briefing looking at sort of what's up and coming. CCRB, Kachuma Conservation Release Board, had a special meeting, closed session, not to report out on yet. Attended a pre-construction with you, Mayor Rouse, a pre-construction Olive Mill Road meeting, giving us direction on what's to come. A report out from the All Dons reunion, the return of Bossy the cow. I think many were looking forward to that. Attended a rescue mission fundraiser, also the Montenegro Couture Sister City event at the Music Academy of the West. And we did have another housing ad hoc committee meeting with Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez and Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez.
All right, very good. And the things I attended with my colleagues, of course, with the Couture Sister Cities events. Also, a proclamation was given for the architects tour, and I forget the name of the title of that. But anyway, it was a thing we did on Saturday afternoon after I went to the Santa Barbara Rescue Mission Bayou Classic, where they raised money for the rescue mission, which was a large and successful event. And with that, I believe we stand adjourned. Thank you.